This is question 12 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia. Thanks for joining me as we go through one question a day of the Summa Theologia. And a couple things to keep in mind as we talk about intention here is that, first of all, we're talking basically about human acts, as this treatise indicates. We are in question 12 now. This treatise goes all the way to question 21. And, in part one of the Summa, it was very metaphysical. We're talking about God and the angels and human nature and things like that, and all the different players, I guess you could say, in the world and creation. Now it's very practical. These are actions, because our life is made up of actions. We do things. We make decisions on an everyday basis. We're drawn to things. We have knowledge. We have epistemology. And so when we talk about intention, this is an expression that we use all the time. I intend to work out tomorrow. I intend to go to work. I intend to be kind to my family. And, you have intentions. And when we get into the new year, we have, resolutions and intentions. And so this, again, is very practical. And it's something that, we all do on a daily basis. In fact, probably on a basis of every single moment of our life, we're intending something in what we do. So anytime anybody were to say that the Summa Theologia is just so abstract and it's hard to understand, well, this is very basic. This is very practical information. So let's get right to it. There are 5 articles, and it's not very long. Whether intention is an act of the intellect or the will. Now, again, I've said this the last few days, is that we want to take an inventory of who we are as a human person. How do we differ from our dog or a goldfish or an angel or God, for that matter, is that we are complicated. We got a lot going on. We have intellect and will. We have appetites. We have desires. We have sensitive appetites. We have passions. We have body, soul, form, matter. And there's a whole lot going on with us. And so when we make intentions to do something, Thomas is saying here, okay, well, let's, we know we have intentions. We know we intend to do things, but let's identify it with what part of the body, or not even the body, what part of the soul is that having to do with, right? And so he's going to come down and say this has to do with our will, for the reason that he will explain here. Intention, as the very word denotes, signifies to tend to something. Now, both the action of the mover and the movement of thing moved tends to something, but that the movement of the thing moved tends to anything is due to the action of the mover. Okay, we tend to things. We are agents that have free will, and so we're able to tend to secondary things. As we have already learned, we don't have any choice when it comes to wanting happiness or desiring the universal good or the universal true. That's kind of built into us. But as far as the decisions we make and what we intend to, we do have some freedom there. Consequently, intention belongs first and principally to that which moves to the end. Hence, we say that an architect or anyone who is an authority, by his command, moves others to that which he intends. I wonder why he said an architect here. It sounds like that would be more like a political leader, but anyways. Now, the will moves all the other powers of the soul to the end, wherefore it is evident that intention, properly speaking, is an act of the will. So now we've placed it in a particular faculty of the human person. And we know that the will is an intellectual appetite, so the intention has to do with that intellectual appetite. Article 2, whether intention is only of the last end. Now, our last end is beatitude, heaven, and so do we intend only in regard to our last end or to some kind of secondary ends? He says intention regards the end as a terminus of the movement of the will. Now, a terminus of movement may be taken in 2 ways. Okay, Thomas always is going to split things up. First, the very last terminus, when the movement comes to a stop. This is the terminus of the whole movement. Secondly, some point midway, which is the beginning of one part of the movement and the end, or terminus of the other. Now, I love what he does here in the next sentence, because I've never seen anywhere in the Summa where Thomas does this. He's using an example with letters, and I wonder how this translates from the original Latin. I guess it translates directly, but he said, thus, in the movement from A to C through B, C is the last terminus, while B is a terminus, but not the last. And intention can be both. Consequently, though intention is always of the end, it need not be always of the last end. Okay, so even something like going to confession or being confirmed, that's not our final end, but it's conducive to the end, which is getting to heaven, right? So I think that's one example there. Whether one can intend two things at the same time. The expression two things may be taken in two ways. They may be ordained to one another or not so ordained. And if they be ordained to one another, it is evident from what has been said that a man can intend several things at the same time. For intention is not only of the last end, as stated above, but also of an intermediary end. Now, a man intends at the same time both the proximate and the last end, as the mixing of a medicine and the giving of health. Okay, he likes to use this example of taking medicine for health. It's a good one because we take the medicine not as an end to itself, but in order that our health will improve, and so one terminus is directed towards another. But if we take two things that are not ordained to one another, thus also a man can intend several things at the same time. This is evident from the fact that a man prefers one thing to another because it is better of the two. Now, one of the reasons for which one thing is better than another is that it is available for more purposes. Wherefore, one thing can be chosen in preference to another because of the greater number of purposes for which it is available, so that evidently a man can intend several things at the same time. Okay. Didn't make entire sense to me, but clearly we can intend multiple things at the same time, and they're all ultimately being directed to the final end, which is beatitude. Whether intention of the end is the same as the volition of the means. So now we're talking about the end and then the means that get us to the end, and is it the same thing? The movement of the will to the end and to the means can be considered in two ways. Okay, every single one of these articles, Thomas has two ways of explaining it. First, according as the will is moved to each of the aforesaid absolutely and in itself. And thus there are really two movements of the will to them. Secondly, it may be considered accordingly as the will is moved to the means for the sake of the end, and thus the movement of the will to the end and its movement to the means are one and the same thing. For when I say I wish to take medicine for the sake of health, okay, there's that example again, I signify no more than one movement of my will. So he's saying that the taking of the medicine for the good health is really one movement of the will. It's not really two, because one of them is ordained to the other. And this is because the end is the reason for willing the means. Now the object, and that by reason of which it is an object, come under the same act. Thus it is the same act in sight that perceives color and light. And the same applies to the intellect, for if it consider the principle and conclusion absolutely, it considers each by a distinct act, but when it assents to the conclusion on account of the principles, there is but one act to the intellect. So this is actually very important, because very rarely in our life are we acting directly for our last end. I'm trying to think of an example of when we do that, when it's, I don't know, maybe on our deathbed or something, but everything that we do is going to be ordained to that. And really, Thomas is saying, in many ways, it's kind of like the same action. It's all together. It's all grouped together. Whether intention is within the competency of irrational animals, okay, like this fish here is an irrational creature, so do they intend things? Thomas says, to intend is to tend to something, and this belongs to the mover and to the moved. Accordingly, Therefore, as that which is moved to an end by another is said to intend the end, thus nature is said to intend an end as being moved to its end by God. Okay, this fish doesn't really have any it doesn't have any free will, it doesn't have any intention, but it's being moved to its end by God, as the arrow is moved by the archer. And in this way, irrational animals intend an end inasmuch as they are moved to something by natural instinct. Okay, so it's not in their mind and they're not thinking about it, but since God is moving them to their end, they, in a sense, intend to achieve this potential end, right? The other way of intending an end belongs to the mover, according as he ordains the movement of something, either by his own or another's, to the end. This belongs to reason alone, wherefore irrational animals do not intend an end in this way, which is to intend properly and principally as stated above. So the only way the irrational creatures really intend anything is if you take a step back and say that God is pushing them and moving them to their end. And in this sense, if you transfer that divine intention to the creature, they are intending, with air quotes, to achieve a particular end. All right, thanks for joining me for this 12th question of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia as we journey through the Summa one question at a time. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you.